Be'ezras Hashem, with Hashem's help, we begin today a new set of laws. Hilchos, Maaseh, Hakorbanos, the laws of the sacrificial procedures. That's how they translate it here. How to do the sacrifices. If you follow the order, the Rambam was extremely organized. So the way he sets up this book, he kind of sets up the process of service in the Beis HaMikdash. First you have the laws of building the structure of the Beis HaMikdash. Then you have the laws of the utensils in the Beis HaMikdash. Then you have the laws of the people who serve in the Beis HaMikdash and who can and cannot go in. Then you have the laws of things that you can't bring as a sacrifice. That was the last set of laws. And now that we've kind of done all the elimination, now let's talk about the ultimate purpose of the Beis HaMikdash. According to the Rambam, the whole reason why we built the temple was to do the sacrifices. So how do we actually do the sacrifices? And as the Rambam always does, he gives us the list of mitzvahs that are going to be discussed in these chapters. Yesh bichlolon shalosh ve'esrim mitzvahs. This is a pretty big, encompassing set of laws. There's 23 mitzvahs going to be discussed in these halachot. Eser mitzvahs aseh, shlesh esrim mitzvahs leisaseh, 10 positive, 13 negative, v'zehu praton, and these are their details. Aleph, lasois ha'oila, k'ma'aseh ha'ksuvim ala seder. To do all the actions associated with the burnt offering as it's written in order in the Torah. Follow all the steps. Beis shalei lechol b'sar oila. It's forbidden to eat the flesh, the meat of a burnt offering. It's totally burnt on the mizbeach. Gimel seder chatas. There's a mitzvah to follow the order of how to offer a sin offering. Daled shalei lechol mibsar chatas hapnimis. The category of sin offering that's called the inside sin offering, and we'll see what that means as we explore the actual laws, where the blood, instead of being sprinkled on the mizbeach outside, was sprinkled on the mizbeach inside. Those are not eaten. Usually you would eat. The Kohanim would eat part of the sin offering, not this one. Hey, shalayavdil b'chatas ha'oif. If a sin offering is being brought as a bird, there's a special way to slaughter it where you don't separate the head from the neck. When it comes to a burnt offering, that's a bird, the way the Kohen would slaughter it, which is also a unique way in and of itself, he would make sure to separate the head from the rest of the body. Comes to the chatas ha'oif, the bird offering, you don't separate. Vav seder ha'asham. There's a special order to be followed when offering a guilt offering. And we'll define what that is. Zayin sheyechlu ha'kohanim sar kachim b'mikdash. When the Kohanim eat the flesh of the highest level sacrifices, they have to eat it in the holy temple premises. Ches shelo yechlu m'chutz la'azara. They cannot eat them outside of the temple courtyard. Tes shelo yechal zar mikachim kachim. A non-Kohen should not partake of the holiest of sacrifices. Yud seder hashlamim, the order that has to be followed when offering a peace offering. And so if somebody wants to just have a korban that he can also partake of for him and his friends, it's called the shlamim, and there's a special way to bring it. Yud aleph shalei lechol b'sar kachim kalim koidem zrikas damim. Shlamim is one example of what's called kachim kalim, lower level, lighter level sacrifices. When you eat the meat of those sacrifices, which is part of the mitzvah to eat them, you cannot eat them before sprinkling the bloods of the sacrifice on the mizbeach. Yud beis lases kol mincha keseder maaseh aksuvim matayra, to make every flower offering following the order of the procedures that are delineated in the Torah. Yud gimel shelo yasim shemen al minchas chaytei, yud daled shelo yitan oleh al levayna. The flower offering of a sinner, certain categories of sin where a person was given the option to bring a sacrifice based on what he could afford. Wealthy, you bring an animal. Less wealthy, you bring a bird. Less wealthy, you bring a flower offering. In that case, the flower offering of the sinner didn't have oil or frankincense. Usually that accompanied flower offerings. This one could not. Tezvav shalei te'achal minchas kayin. Whenever a Kohen brings a flower offering, it was not eaten. Tezayin shalei te'afel minchas chametz. Never can you make a flower offering into chametz. Even though it was flour, you can never let it rise for 18 minutes. Yud zayin shel yechlu hakohanim shiarim menachos. Usually the Kohanim would eat the leftover flour of a flower offering. Part of it was brought on the mizbeach. The rest was given to the Kohanim. Yud ches sheyavi adam kol nedarav v'nidveisav beregel shepaga b'rishin. The mitzvah is that if a person promises or donates a sacrifice voluntarily, he needs to bring it at the first holiday after the promise. 3 times a year we go to the temple. Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, 3 holidays. So if a person lives outside of Yerushalayim and he makes a promise to bring a sacrifice, whatever holiday comes next, that's when he has to bring it. You should not delay fulfilling your promise or donation, sacrifice, or anything else which you pledge and you're obligated to bring. Special mitzvah, you must bring all sacrifices only in the house that Hashem chose, in the Beis HaMikdash. There's a special mitzvah that if you're living outside of Israel and you sanctify the sacrifice, you must bring it to the temple to be offered. It's forbidden to slaughter any sacrifices outside of the temple courtyard. And Chav Gimel, separate prohibition to offer the sacrifice outside the temple courtyard. So even if you would slaughter it in the temple courtyard and you took it out and offered it outside, doesn't count. You have transgressed a prohibition. The explanation of these mitzvahs is coming in the following 19 chapters. So for almost 3 weeks, we're going to be dealing with the procedures related to sacrifices. Just on a mystical note, the word Maaseh Hakorbanos, doing the sacrifices, the Rabbi said also reflects how we have to live. Because really, sacrifice is what? It's bringing an animal to Hashem, but it represents, according to the Zohar, Korban, bringing ourselves close to Hashem. The animal was a mirror reflection of what the person was supposed to be doing. And even when we don't have a temple, our avoda, our service, is to bring ourselves closer to Hashem. And the Rambam calls it Maaseh Hakorbanos, because some people think that the way to get close to Hashem is by having spiritual experiences, transcendental experiences, larger than life experiences. No. The real korban is when it comes down into Maaseh, into action, doing what you have to do, living as you have to live, doing all the Torah and mitzvahs Hashem wants. But that's the mystical or practical part of it. Of course, we're now learning the actual halachas. Perek Rishon, chapter 1. This chapter is really setting down the guidelines. The Rambam is going to give us the basic principles that relate to every single sacrifice. He'll give us the different categories, different animals, different species, as we're going to get into it. You know, in Moreh Nevuchim, which is the Rambam's other book, the Guide to the Perplexed, a big part of it is spent giving rational reasons for most mitzvahs. And the Rambam makes an introductory statement. He says, all the reasons that I give are only for the generalities of the mitzvahs. But if somebody were to tell you that every detail of every mitzvah has a logical reason, hu mishtagea be'enai shigaon aroch. That's what he says. In my eyes, he's crazy. And he gives sacrifices as the example. All the details of the ages and the amounts and the numbers and the types. So that's all beyond logic. That's Hashem, His divine will, that we have to just do even if we don't understand. You want to find the reason in general of why we bring sacrifices? Fine. But all the specifics are literally Hashem's ratzon, Hashem's will. And of course, in halacha, it becomes super exact, because we have to know exactly what everything and where everything needs to be brought, as the Rambam rules in these halachas. So let's get right to them, and let's explore the different types of sacrifices. It says the Rambam as a general introduction. Halacha Aleph, Kol Hakorbanos, Shel Minei Nefesh Chaya. All sacrifices that come from all living species, Bayin Mechamisha Minin Bilvad, can only come from one of 5 species. In other words, if you see a sacrifice being brought in the temple, you can guess that it's one of these 5. Min habakar, cattle, which is calves, cows, bulls. Umin hakvasim, sheep. Umin ha'izim, and goats. Umin ha'toirim, turtle doves. Umin b'nei hayayna, and pigeons. That's it. These are the only 5 that are allowed. The question is, different sacrifices, different ages, different male, female. But it's always these 5. That's as far as the animals. Halacha beis, v'chol hakorbanos, bein shel tzibur, bein shel yachid. With regards to the sacrifices themselves, whether they're communal or individual, arba, meaning there are 4 categories of sacrifices. Oila, burnt offering. V'chatas, sin offering. V'asham, guilt offering. Ushlamim, and peace offering. In the Midrash, it just says Oila, chatas, shlamim, because really asham is like a subcategory. It's also for certain sins. Just certain sins you bring a chatas, certain sins you bring an asham. In addition to these 4, which could be communal or individual, there are 3 that are only individual. And they are ha-pesach, the ha-bechoyer, the ha-meiser. The Passover sacrifice, we bring once a year. Firstborn, whenever a person has a firstborn male animal, it goes to Hashem. And meiser is the tithe. Every year you bring all your animals that were born that year into a pen. You have them walk out one at a time. Every 10th one is a sacrifice to Hashem. Those are only individual sacrifices. Those are not public or communal. Halacha dalid. Now let's play around with the communal individual definitions. Kol korbanos hatzibur. Any communal sacrifice, hein oila oichatas, are generally going to be only a burnt offering or a sin offering. The entire community can bring a burnt offering. As the Rambam will soon list, for example, classically the daily sacrifice, the korban tamid, burnt offering. Or there are many times that you bring a sin offering. Every holiday, every Shabbos, part of the Musaf sacrifice was a chatas, was a sin offering. Ve'ein bekarbanes hatzibur shlamim. There is no peace offering that's a communal sacrifice, chutz mishnei kvasim habayim im lechem atnufa ba'atzeres, except for the 2 sheep that were brought together with the 2 breads on Shavuos. Here you can see the 2 sheep. They're bringing them behind the 2 loaves of bread. That's Shavuos. Once a year, there was a shlamim, a peace offering on behalf of the community, and in fact, v'hem anikraim zivchei shalmei tzibur. They're called the offering. That's the peace offering. That's communal because it's so unique. Only once a year. Ve'ein hatzibur makrivin asham la'elam, but a community will never bring a guilt offering, nor will they bring ever a bird. There will never be a bird being brought on the Mizbeach on behalf of the community. Halacha hey. Let's list some of the community and some of the individual sacrifices. Just for easy purposes, I made it into 5 and 10. It's a little bit, if you go into the details, the Rambam kind of makes a little bit more, but just for the nice chart, I made 5 communal types of sacrifices and 10 individual. Hakorbanos hatzibur heim. The community sacrifices are Shnei Tmidin Shel Kol Yom, the daily sacrifices, twice a day, morning and evening. Umusfei Shabbosos v'Rosh Chodashim v'Hamoyados. The additional sacrifices that are brought on all special days, Shabbos, new month, holidays. Third category, Useir Chatos Shel Yom HaKippurim, the special sin offering that was brought on Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur goat, part of the service in the temple. We're going to see each one of these has a whole set of laws around them, but on Yom Kippur, part of the service was the high priest would take 2 goats, make a raffle. One of them would be sent off a cliff, and one of them was brought as a special sin offering on behalf of the Jewish people in the temple. That's the Seir Chatos Shel Yom HaKippurim. A fourth category, V'cheinim shagagu bezdin v'hoiru ba'avodah zara. If the high court made a mistake, and they ruled erroneously, mistakenly about serving idols, there came a ruling out of the high court that some kind of idol worship was allowed, and then they discovered their mistake. Mevi kol shevet v'shevet par v'soyer. It's a very unique sacrifice. There's a whole set of laws about it called Hilchos in the next book. But every tribe would have to bring together par v'soyer, a bull and a goat. Hapar oila v'hasoyer chatos. The bull was a burnt offering. The goat was a sin offering. Ve'elu hasi'irim him anikraim sirei avodah zara. These are called the avodah zara goats. That's the fourth category. So the communal sacrifices that come as a result of a mistaken ruling on idol worship. If the court made a mistake and they made a erroneous ruling with relation to any other mitzvah, mivin par lechatos, they only bring a bull, not as a burnt offering, but as a sin offering. Par helem davar shel tzibur, that's called the bull that's brought on account of information that was hidden from the community. In other words, because the Beis Din made a mistake, you bring a bull. Those are the 5 categories of communal sacrifices. Vav, karbanes hayachid. The individual sacrifices are much more wide-ranging. Hey, they are. First of all, habecher v'hamaiser, firstborn and tithes. I put them in one table here together because the Rambam does so later also in the next book. He says that they're both considered in one category because Torah puts them together. The hapesach, the Passover offering. The hachagiga, the hishlamim. I put the next few in also in one category. The karban chagiga, the celebratory sacrifice, which is a peace offering, brought every holiday. V'hariyah, and the special sacrifice that you bring upon coming to the temple to see Hashem and to be seen by Him, v'hi oilos, which is burnt offerings. Those were the holiday sacrifices. The karban hager is a special convert sacrifice. When a person converts to Judaism, brings a sacrifice, v'hu oila min habehema, and it's either a burnt offering from animals, or he brings 2 birds, pigeons or turtle doves. Both of them are a burnt offering. Or 2 animals, 1 burnt and 1 peace offering. Different categories, depending on what he can afford. That's the carbon of a convert. Then you have voluntary offerings. A person makes a promise or pledges to bring a burnt offering or a peace offering. Those are good. Ushlamim habayin im halechem is a special offering that's basically like a peace offering, has the same rules, but it comes together with bread. Hema nikraim toida, that's called the Thanksgiving offering. Then you have what I like to call more like ritual offerings. V'chein karbanes hanazir, v'chein oila v'chatos ushlamim, sacrifices brought by a Nazirite at the end of his term, burnt offering, sin offering, peace offering. The karbanes mitzaira, v'chein chatos v'asham v'oila, sacrifices brought by a person who was healed from tsaras, from the skin lesions, sin offering, guilt offering, burnt offering. Next category is v'karbanes zavim v'yoldes, ritual impurity. Sacrifices brought by a zav, a person who had an abnormal discharge, or a birthing woman. Mehin chatas v'oila, 2 sacrifices, sin offering, burnt offering. Then you have what we'll generalize as sin offerings, different categories. The karban hashogeg b'mitzvahs leisas sheyesh bakares v'hu chatas, a person who makes certain prohibitions, if you transgress them inadvertently, the ones that carry excision, were they to be done purposely. If you do them by mistake, you bring a chatas, a sin offering. If you were in doubt whether you committed that sin or not, maybe asham v'hu anikra asham talu, you bring a special guilt offering called the guilt offering of doubt. There are other sins that to begin with you bring what's called a guilt offering, the definite guilt offering. So I put them all together in one table here as the sin offerings. And the last one is the burnt offering ram and the sin offering bull, which the high priest brings on his own account, not on behalf of the Jewish people. It was a communal sacrifice. On Yom Kippur, harehin karban yachid, these are all individual sacrifices. This last bull that the Kohen Gadol brings is called the bull of Yom Kippur. All these different categories, we made over here 15 categories, but maybe it's more like 18 categories, are all explicit in the Torah. And the laws, the specifics relating to each one will be explained in their place. Many of them have their own sets of laws, many of them will be covered in this set of laws. Another general rule when it comes to sacrifices. Halacha zayin kol karbanos hayachid chayav ba'achrayusan u'ba'achrayos niskehen. Any individual sacrifice, not a communal one, any individual one, a person is obligated to replace it if it gets lost or stolen, as well as the libations that accompany it. Every sacrifice comes along with flour, wine, and oil. If those get lost, you have to replace them. Chutz min hanedava, except if you'd made a donation. And the difference is how you formulated it. If you say, Hare alai, I take it upon myself to bring a sacrifice, then the responsibility is on you. And even if the animal that you chose gets lost, you have to replace it. But if you pointed to an animal and you said, Hare zu, this animal is going to be a sacrifice, then it's only that one. That's a nadava. And therefore, if it gets lost, well, too bad. It got lost. I don't have to bring that again. I can't. But that's all for individual sacrifices. All communal sacrifices, nobody's obligated to replace it or to replace the libations. If they get lost, they get lost. But if the sacrifice was already brought and then the libations got lost, they're obligated to replace the libations and bring them, because once you brought the korban, you got to bring the accompanying things. The korban yachid shekavu alei zman, an individual sacrifice that has a set time, like a Passover sacrifice, for example, you have to bring it on this day. Harei hu korban sibur. So as we've seen in the laws of coming into the temple, that any time an individual sacrifice carries a specific time, it has the same laws as a communal sacrifice. And in this case, you aren't liable to replace it. Halacha ches. Let's now cover the specific categories within the Hakorbanos. Kol oilas behema. So first we go with the oila, the burnt offering. If we're dealing with an animal burnt offering, it's only going to be a male. If somebody came with a burnt offering, it has to be a male. But it can come from all three categories of animal: sheep, goats, cattle.
And why? What's the reason?
We don't know the reason. So it says in the Torah. Zachar tamim yakrivenu. It has to be a male. A male from all the categories: sheep, goats, cows, whether adults or young. If they're coming from the birds, which they could, turtle doves or pigeon, but then they can be male or female. It doesn't make a difference. If it's an animal, it has to be male. If it's a bird, it could be both. Halacha tes hachatas, sin offering. Same thing. It can come from any of the five. Male, female, adult, or young. But as we're going to see in a couple of halachas, that doesn't mean that every sin offering could be all of them. There are some sin offerings that can only be male, some that can only be female, as the Rambam will describe. But in the end of the day, in other words, inclusively speaking, on the whole, there could be a chatas from any species, any animal. Halacha yod ha'asham. When you're in the guilt offering, this is very specific. Einei ba'ala mizichre kvasim bilvad. Can only be a male sheep. Yesh asham ba migdele minzeh, v'yesh asham ba min aktanim. Some ashams come from the adult version, some come from the young version. We'll soon define what adult and young means, but only male sheep. Halacha yud aleph hashlamim, the peace offerings. Ba'im min akvasim u'min ha'izim u'min ha'bakar, mischarim u'min ha'keves min ha'gdelim u'min ha'ktanim. all kinds of animals are kosher, sheep, goats, and cattle, male and female, adult or young, but no birds. You never have a peace offering of birds. Haktanim. Now we kept on saying adult and young. What's adult and young? So the Rambam says, Ktanim, young means mi ben shmeinas yamim ad shana tmima miyam liyam. From the day the baby animal is 8 days old, because before then, we saw in the last set of laws, it's called mechusar zman, missing time, you can't bring it. But once it's 8 days old and fit to be a sacrifice, till it reaches 1 year old. 1 year old means exactly, from day to day. It was born on this day, the next year on that day, it turns 1 year old. Im nis abra shana, nis abra lay. If the calendar year is extended, it's a leap year, it works in your favor. It's still part of the first year. What is an adult animal? Babakar, if we're talking about cattle, cows, bulls, ad shalish shanim shleimus miyam liyam. From the day it turns 1 year old to the day it turns 3 years old. Ubatzayin, ad shtei shanim shleimus miyam liyam. Sheep, from 1 year old till it's 2 years old. Yossi al zeh harehu zaken ve'in makrivin I say. More than that, it's old. And as we saw, old is literally a mum. It's one of the defects. You cannot bring an old animal. So you really only have the first 3 years of a cow's life, 2 years of a sheep's life to bring a sacrifice.
You really need to write down.
Yeah, you have to keep track of every animal, where it was holding, and the ages. Yeah. Because at a certain point, it cannot be brought as a sacrifice. Halacha Yud Beis, afal pisha kol hakorbanos ksherim. Even though we said in the last set of laws that all sacrifices are kosher to be brought once they're 8 days old, initially, if we can, we only bring a sacrifice once it's 30 days old. Except for the 3 uniquely individual sacrifices: firstborn, Passover sacrifice, tithe sacrifice. You wanted to bring them on the 8th day to begin with, no problem. Halacha Yud Gimel, Sha'is Meinin L'Kadashim. I think this is the only category in Halacha where we do this. You count hours for sacrifice. If they added or subtracted 1 hour, it could be disqualified. Usually we say we count days. If you're born on this day, your bar mitzvah is 13 years later on that day. But not by the hour that you're born. But with animals it is. Ketzad, what does that look like? Karban shemitzvah seliyas ben shana. If there's a sacrifice whose mitzvah is that it has to be within its first year, and not over 1 year old. Im hoysif al hashana shah achas nifsal. If you know the animal was born at 12 p.m. and the next year you bring it on that day at 1 p.m., disqualified. Afilu haya ben shana b'shas shchita v'hoysif al hashana b'shas zrika. Even if you sacrificed it before its birthday, and then you sprinkled the blood after its birthday. In other words, the birth moment, really, not birthday, birth moment. Nifsal is disqualified. Achiyah ben shana shazrika has to be within the first year until you sprinkle the blood. And the same applies to all sacrifices. Yudalid. The last halacha was the more general terms, how old an animal could be. But there are some animals where this is how old they should be. Kol makom shenemar b'Torah keves oy kivsa oy kvasim. Whenever Torah uses the word keves, which means sheep, or kivsa, female sheep, or kvasim, sheep in the plural, hare'elu b'nei shana. Always keves means in its first year of life, young sheep. If Torah uses the word ram or rams, that's the adult male animals in their second year. When does it begin to be called a ram? 31 days into its second year. So during its first year, it's called keves. During most of its second year, it's called ayil. What about that middle month? On the 30th day, or during the 30 days, it's not kosher as a sheep or as a ram, it's called a palgas. Palgas is related to the word half. Not here nor there. If Torah uses the word egel, which means calf, ben shana, that's within its first year. Par, if it's a bull, ben shtayim in its second year. Seir izim, if Torah uses the word a kid goat, ben shana, that's within its first year. Sa'ir, an adult goat, ben shtayim in its second year. Kol shana shniya hu nikra sa'ir. All of its second year, it's called a sa'ir. So seir izim and sa'ir are 2 ages within the goat family. Halacha tezvav. Kol karbanes hatzibur zecharim. Another rule about all communal sacrifices is that they're always male. So even though we said, for example, that a sin offering, right, could be brought as male or female, but that means in totality. If there's going to be a public sin offering, it's always going to be a male. V'chol chatois shel tzibur, as the Rambam says, all communal sin offerings, min ha'ezeh min ha'bakar, only come from goats or cattle. Ve'ein b'hem min ha'kvasim, no sheep. Even though, again, there could be a type of sin offering brought from the sheep, not the communal ones. V'chol oiles ha'tzibur, communal burnt offerings, min ha'kvasim or min ha'bakar, ve'ein lan ela min ha'ez. Can be sheep or cattle, but not goats. Even though it's possible to bring a burnt offering from a goat, that would be an individual one, not a communal one. Kol chatas yachid nekeva. All individual sin offerings were actually only female. Even though there could be a male one, it's the communal ones, not the individual ones. It's always eaten by the kohanim, and it doesn't come from the cattle, only from sheep or goats. Chutz mishalish chatois, except for 3 categories of chatas. Chatas nasi, shehi eiz v'necheles, the sin offering brought by a king, which is a goat and also eaten. The chatas kohen Mashiach, sin offering of a kohen gadol who rules erroneously. Shu par v'nisrefes, it's a bull and it's burnt. V'hu par abal kol mitzvah is also known as the bull that's offered on account of all mitzvahs if a kohen gadol rules mistakenly. The hashlishi, and the third one is parsha mevi kohen gadol b'yom kippurim v'hu chatas v'nisraf, the bull brought by the kohen gadol, which is a burnt offering and also burnt, which is sin offering and also burnt, not eaten. Halacha tezayin, kol chatois shel tzibur ne'achalis. All communal sin offerings are eaten. Chutz misar shel Yom Kippurim shechaver de mishtaleach, except for the special Yom Kippur goat, whose friend gets sent off to the mountain because it was 2 goats in a raffle. One of them went off the cliff. One of them was brought as a sacrifice. That was not eaten. V'chein siri avodah zaro parhelim. Also the goats brought when the court rules erroneously about idol worship, and a bull when they rule erroneously about other mitzvahs. Uparabal kol mitzvahs uparhelim, and for this reason, both the bull brought by the kohen gadol when he rules erroneously, and by the court when they rule erroneously, nikrayim parim hanisrafim, they're called the burnt bulls, because they're sin offerings but they're burnt. The goats brought for idol worship erroneous rulings are called the burnt goats for that reason, because they're also not eaten unlike any other sin offering. From this you learn, in summary, there are 5 types of burnt sin offerings, 2 individual and 3 communal. Halacha Yud Zayin. Kol Hakorbanos elu nikrayim zvachim. Another name, synonym for sacrifice is zvachim. You see the word zvachim anywhere in Torah, it refers to all types of sacrifices. But if you want to get specific, v'chol ha'oiles v'achatois v'ha'ashamos u'shnei kivsei shlamim shel atzeres nikrayim kodshei kodshim. If you want to get specific, there's a category that's called the Holy of Holies, higher level sacrifices. That's all burnt offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings, and the special peace offerings brought by the community on Shavuos. Avol shlamim shel yachid v'ha'becher v'ha'maiser v'ha'pesach nikrayim kodshim kalim. But individual peace offerings, firstborn, tithe, and Passover sacrifice are called lower level, lighter sacrifices. As we actually say every morning before davening, that chapter of Mishnah, Yizel Mekayman, we list all the Holy of Holy sacrifices and the lesser holy sacrifices. Halacha Yudches ha'evarim sheser fenes al gabi ha'mizbeach. Every sacrifice has some limbs that are burnt on the mizbeach, min ha'chatois ha'ne'achalos, u'min ha'ashamois, u'min ha'shlamim, whether it's from the eaten sin offerings, guilt offerings, or peace offerings. Of course, if it's a burnt offering, the whole thing goes in the mizbeach. But when you have an animal which is partially burnt, partially eaten, the parts that are burnt, hema nikrayim emurim. They're called emurim. So from now on, whenever you hear the word emurim, emurim means the limbs of the animal that are brought on the mizbeach. The eluhein ha'emurim. And these are the emurim. What are the parts that are brought from every sacrifice on the mizbeach? So if it's shel shor shel eiz, if it's a bull, an ox, or a goat, it's like this. Hachelev asher ala kerev, the fat that covers the stomachs. Going back to these laws, right? Every animal has 4 stomachs. The way it digests the system goes to one, comes out, goes to the other, comes out. On the 4, this is an outside view of the 4-stomach system, and you have what's called today greater omentum and the lesser omentum, 2 layers of fat that cover the stomachs. Both of them were brought on the mizbeach. That's the chelev asher ala kerev, lesser omentum, ubichloloi chelev shal gabe akeva. Included in it is the fat that covers the entire stomach system, this one in the back. And then you bring ushtei akloyos, v'chelev shalei, and the 2 kidneys with the fat on them over here, towards the upper part of the animals, the kidneys. Im hachelev asher al haksolim, together with the fat that covered the flanks. These pieces of meat, the pink columns over that run down, have different layers of fat attached to them. That's the chelev on the ksolim, on the flanks. V'yoseres hakaved, and what's called the additional lobe attached to the liver. I took this also from the art scroll. You can see just this little piece over here. A lot of words here, just ignore them all. But up, there's a little lobe attached to the liver. That's the Yoseres HaKaved. V'neitel min HaKaved me'at im HaYoseres. And you end up taking a little bit of the liver itself also, with the lobe of the liver. And that's the parts that go on the Mizbeach, that's it. If it's a sheep, moisif al elu ha'aliyah tmima. You add the entirety of the fatty tail, im hachulyes min hashedra, together with all the vertebrae of the spine, ad mekayim hakloyos, till you reach the kidneys. So this is a sheep, here are the kidneys. You would take the tail all the way up with these bones, following all the way to the place of the kidneys. Shanemar, as it says in the Torah, that when it's talking about a sheep, you take specially ha'aliyah smima, le'umas he'otze yisirena. You should remove it opposite the kidneys. That means take the tail off all the way to the point of the kidneys. All the burnt parts are burnt on the outside mizbeach. Whether it's a bull, a goat, or a sheep that has the extra part, all the emurim are on the outside. Halacha yutes, hoysa habehema meuberes. If the animal that was sacrificed was pregnant, afal pisha kalu chadashav shal ubar, even if the fetus reached full term, its months are complete. Va'afilu nimtza chai, even if it was discovered to be alive, einay maile chelbayim chelev imay ela chelev imay bilvad. You do not bring the fats of the fetus together with the fats of the mom. Only the fats of the mom go on the mizbeach. The fetus is considered like any other part of its limbs. It is not on its own entity that has to have its own parts brought on the mizbeach. It counts alone. It's separate. You can eat it all, and only the fats of the mom are offered on the mizbeach.